All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for volunteering your time to give us some feedback. We thoroughly enjoyed this case study. My name is Jasmine Johnson, and I've had the pleasure of working with the two students that are on this call.
Hi, I'm Cassidy Davis, another member on this team.
And I'm Alexander Breitling, the third member on this team. So we'll transition straight into our agenda today. We have broken down the case study and this presentation into these seven areas of discussion. First, we'll talk about the student, who Juan is. Then we'll look at the university where Juan is a full-time student at. We'll look at the problems of the case from our collective perspective, the response that the university decided was appropriate. Then we'll look at some of our own research and what we thought would be appropriate as we addressed the issues outlined in the case through a theory to practice slide. And then we'll look at the interventions and solutions that we propose in order to address this issue at State University and help the community grow forward and heal. And lastly, we'll wrap it up with a conclusion and kind of provide some context of how we came to our approach. So first, let's look at Juan as a student at State University. So State University is a large, predominantly white public institution. We don't know much about Juan in terms of his identities. Thus, we can only go off of what was explicitly stated for us as to avoid assumptions. So we know that Juan is a full-time sophomore at State University, and he's also a veteran student that suffers from chronic pain. We could presume that Juan could be classified with a disability, but since it wasn't explicitly stated, we didn't provide too much context on that. But we did mainly focus on his role as a veteran student. We also know that he's been prescribed a medicinal marijuana card to treat his chronic pain. So it's really critical to understand Juan as a veteran student and his veteran status. Through a synthesis of research, through our coursework, and on our own time as we prepared for this case study, research is pretty clear that veteran students frequently navigate higher education institutions at sometimes really strong different rates than non-veteran peers. Specifically, veterans are used to authority figures in their time within the military. Everything is chain of command in the military. One reports to another officer, which reports to a lieutenant, and so on and so forth. This sense of authority guides veterans during their time in the service because they're explicitly told what to do, what not to do, and when to do it. This structure is often not found to the same degree within higher education institutions. There's a lot more autonomy when higher education are moved away from the in loco parentis guiding philosophy in our early understandings of the field. They transition to a more autonomous style. And so students are treated as adults and they're not explicitly told what time to wake up, where to be at in that depth of detail that they have in the military. Additionally, Juan is navigating the civilian world. We don't know if Juan is a transfer or if he's in his sophomore year, which means he's been at State University for 2 years. Regardless, Juan is still understanding what the civilian world is like. Juan obviously was born into the civilian world, presumably, but his time in the service definitely had a lot more structure than he's experiencing at State University.
So, State University is a large research institution in the United States. It has over 11,000 students, with 81% of those students being enrolled full-time. There's a stated prioritization of responsibility to the economic, social, cultural, and overall health of the community. It's a predominantly white institution. A research-informed approach to practice would be prudent for practitioners employed at State University, in order to serve the unique needs of the diverse student population on this campus. And almost 30% of students do not claim white identity. Thus, it's crucial for practitioners to be aware of literature and good practices to serve non-white students on this campus. So the central and secondary problems within this case are Juan is perceived as disoriented in his resident hall steps from a peer, and that was an assumption. The student affairs professional David failed to inquire into Juan's life or what could be causing the perceived disoriented appearance. Juan confessed to marijuana possessing marijuana in the residence hall, which violates the housing contract and the Federal Drug-Free Workplace Act, even though he has a medical license. And Juan is put on probation from living in the residence halls. The secondary issues are students begin protesting outside of the deans of students' office, and there is an apparent lack of awareness to the Federal Drug-Free Workplace Act. The response from State University was a State University police officer arrested Juan for marijuana use, and the dean of students met with Juan, mentioned the policy violation, and then informed Juan of his suspension.
Now we're going to connect the case study and what we read with what we learned and what we know, which is theory. So some theories that were used to guide our response that we came up with coming up includes just remembering that veteran students navigate higher education differently than their peers. They have different lived experiences, different maybe trauma or scars from those experiences, or really positive ones. And so that transition is going to look different going again to the civilian life, like Alex mentioned, but also a civilian life on a college campus where decisions were made for them, being in the military, to now it being a greater autonomy. It's just going to be a different change of pace that they're going to have to get used to. Remembering too that student affairs professionals should lead with empathy and understanding, as students come from a variety of different backgrounds and lived experiences. Two theories that we really leaned into were Crenshaw's intersectionality theory. So again, understanding that all the individual aspects of every person are present or not as predominantly displayed, dependent on situations. So what we mean by that is understanding that Juan's veteran status or race, gender, socioeconomic background, whatever it may be, is going to be displayed differently dependent on the situation and dependent on how a student affairs professional or other students approach him with that, right? If Jasmine is approaching me with empathy, I'm probably going to respond more empathetic than if I'm met with harsh tones. I'm probably going to want to be harsh back. And so recognizing that the different traits someone has is going to show up differently and overlap consistently regardless of a situation. And then the second theory we really leaned into was Sanford's theory of challenge and support. So understanding that veteran students come from highly structured backgrounds, like we mentioned, and that they may need additional support or challenge as they navigate the civilian world. So whether that be needing extra validation or resources provided, support from student affairs professionals, or someone also challenging them to be like, hey, you could do better. Here's areas to grow. We see potential in you. We want to call you out and hold you to a high standard because you're capable of it. Some recommended interventions and solutions we discussed were that the major ethical and legal dilemmas at the forefront of this case is that Juan did break the campus policy in the Federal Drug-Free Workplace Act, but also noting that nobody inquired into Juan's life or addressed the perceived disoriented appearance. And then the campus partners that we would recommend collaborating with and how they could be involved and to what degree would begin with student conduct and support. We strongly believe that there needs to be some education and outreach once an announcement comes out from either the Dean of Students, VP of Student Affairs, whoever it may be, just some sort of education and outreach to better help students, faculty, and staff understand the rules that are in place and the laws that surround this. And then perhaps moving forward, working towards educational material to be released, either within a first-year seminar, a welcome week, new student orientation program, or even a Canvas course that is required completion during the first week of classes. This allows students to be more aware of something rather than just reading a contract that maybe they didn't really read and they just signed. It provides a more interactive way for students to engage with the content, and then also maybe having faculty and staff go through those trainings so they can understand and support students who come to them with questions about them. Second would be the Veteran Student Center. Propose an open forum where questions by students can be answered, and State University can restate their support for veteran students and acknowledge how veteran students navigate college from different angles than many of their non-veteran counterparts. I think alongside this, including in that panel, the Dean of Students, VP of Student Affairs, a member of the Student Support and Conduct team, someone from campus counseling. I think just having them all represent and remember that they're a part of the same team and serving the same community, and that they provide a unanimous front in this is going to help address situations that students may have better and make them feel more heard, seen, and accepted by their university, rather than that they're just fighting against it. And so this open forum can provide an avenue for questions to be asked and to get real answers, rather than just sending an email and getting a generic response back. And it's done in a timely and effective way. The third group would be campus counseling, like I mentioned. Making them aware of the situation and the plan for the Dean of Students, VP of Student Affairs, or whoever to make an announcement that will be to include counseling services as a resource for when students don't feel themselves. Oftentimes, counseling is seen as a shame or a resource a lot of people don't want to go to because they feel broken or that they don't deserve it or just so many reasons. And so I think, again, reminding students that it's there, especially just to have someone to talk to in these times where you don't really know who to talk to about things, I think is relevant. And then making those student affairs professionals aware of the situation is going to make them better practitioners in their area when students do come in. Lastly, housing and residential life. It said in the case study that an RA was informed of this and kind of had to call a bunch of people. So I do think debriefing the situation with that specific RA is relevant, but also other RAs are going to hear whispers from students. And so having some sort of opportunity for full-time residential and housing life professional staff members to speak with those student workers is really important to help stop gossip and maybe I don't know, mediate some of those conversations in a more productive way as it is peer-to-peer support. And then encouraging residents and housing life to send an email out to students reminding them to go back and reread their housing contract they had signed before the academic year began. I know when I got that, I did not read it. As a student, I just signed it and was like, yay, I'm moving into my residence hall. Can't wait. And so I do think that would be a great opportunity for them to hear and recognize what students are saying and send something out just for them to read. Because as we know, rules are different depending on where you live. If you live in an off-campus house, it's going to look different than an on-campus residence hall. And so I think that is very useful.
So next we'll transition into kind of what we thought of as an appropriate response to the community. Specifically, we wanted to incorporate someone that wasn't mentioned in the case. And so we chose the Senior Vice President for Student Affairs to really lead the response to the community. One, they are a central leader and kind of the stop point for student concerns before it reaches the Office of the President. And secondly, they're not mentioned in the case at all. So I think if the Dean of Students leads the response, there could be a resistance to listening by some of the students in opposition to the issue in general. They have perceived the Dean of Students has already explicitly stated how they feel. They've suspended the student. And so with the Dean of Students leading the response, it could be ill received. So we want to really remind students of marijuana and drug policies and how federal laws trump what we believe to be ethical or just. It's important to understand that marijuana use is a political conversation that's in national discourse across every state right now. Each election cycle, there's measures on ballots to legalize it recreationally or medicinally. However, until federal law changes, state university and universities alike cannot amend policies that go against the federal rules and regulations. Thus, it's important to kind of mitigate some of our negative pushback by putting some of the blame on the federal law and elevating the cognizance of students to this federal act that guides our response to breaches of that policy. We also want to take this time to reaffirm commitment to the social and cultural elements that we stated in our mission. This is something that State University is serious about, and we want to ensure that we are committed to the social and cultural aspects of our campus and our surrounding community. Of course, we also, with any issue, it's imperative to reassess policies and responses to violations. Moving forward, we would encourage staff to, one, lead with empathy, and two, to fail or to avoid assumptions. Failure to consider the humanistic element of people oftentimes is an erroneous approach to the student affairs practice. It's critical to seek to understand rather than judge and assume. And we definitely want to remind staff and students as well to kind of lead with empathy. So some of the seen and or unforeseen consequences that could arise from our response, first and foremost, naturally, there could be continued protests from students. Our response might be a Band-Aid on some of their concerns, and we'd have to address that moving forward. And that's something we're cognizant of, that protests could persist. And we're also cognizant that protests could reach the national level and negative publicity could occur against State University. It's crucial to have a robust PR team and release a timely, effective statement to ensure that everyone is aware that this is a federal policy. I think our response to Juan could have been different. Definitely want to seek to understand what could be going on in Juan's life rather than assuming the student is abusing marijuana or is high on campus. So definitely can readjust our policies and how we respond, but we do want to mitigate national negative publicity as best as we can. So in conclusion, we really came to know our responses based off of our coursework through our master's program. We did a lot of research in the classroom, but also on our own time on NASPA competencies, relevant theories, and pertinent literature that helps guide our response. And we have routine collaboration with students that helps inform our approach. And so we really prioritize our time with our students and our roles and how we're able to address student concerns, hopefully effectively in a future full-time role. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.